after a song from Tears. That was not from Tears. For Clumpness. Thank you guys so much. That was awesome. So my talk today is called Habit of a Lifetime. And nowadays, when we hear about people talking about habits, we often say, that they're bad to have habits. They keep us stuck and we're not moving forward. And certainly, some habits are less life-affirming than others. And most of us have some sort of life habit that isn't necessarily for our highest good or maybe even causes some harm. And we're going to talk about those in just a minute. But first of all, I want to cover this idea about habits. We as humans, we are creatures of habit, right? We all have habits that provide a certain structure for our lives. I'm willing to bet that most of you brush your teeth the same way every morning. Yeah? Do you shower using the same routine every morning? You shave going in the same direction. You make your coffee using the same process, right? My morning habits, for instance, I get up, I make my coffee, I check email and Facebook and the weather and the news in the same order all the time, never varying. And I'm disturbed when my routine is upset, or if I go out of order for some reason. I don't feel quite right. I don't feel properly caffeined and connected and informed. And it makes me feel out of balance for the day. So in truth, some of our habitual patterns are not necessarily bad, nor do they illustrate a lack of creativity or forward movement. They simply provide a structure, a balance, a sense of order and orderliness. And they're very natural. And they're normal. Reminds me of a story. There's this man who every day when he would drive to work, he would pass by a donut store. And he would stop and get a box of donuts and take it into the office. And he finally decided he really needed to stop that, right? Because it had become such a habit of his. So he decided that he was not going to go to the donut store anymore. And he was going to even take a different route to the office to avoid going by the donut store. And so this went on for quite a little while, and then one day he shows up at the office again with a box of donuts. And his friends are like, so what happened? I thought you weren't going to do this anymore. And he said, well, here's what happened. He says, I had to run an errand before I came into the office. And he says, and it took me by the donut store. And so I said to the universe, okay, if I'm supposed to stop and get donuts, then there's going to be a front row parking place right in front so I can go in and get it. He says, by golly, by the 8th time around the block. Anybody? Yeah. So I could spend all morning long talking about how to overcome our bad physical habits, because most of us think about that. Smoking, overeating, drinking drugs, donuts. But frankly, there are a lot of really effective programs that address those kinds of habits and those kinds of behaviors. And what almost all of them have in common is what I really want to talk about today, and that is our habitual thinking. You know what I'm talking about. Our default thinking. The thinking that we wake up with. Our unconscious go-to thoughts. You know the one I'm talking about, right? Because most of us, for whatever reason, I haven't figured this out yet, our habitual thinking is usually not very loving. And it's not very positive, and it's not usually very life-affirming, is it? Our internal voice, which gives voice to our habitual thinking, is kind of shrewish. It's almost always self-critical to ourselves and to others, and sometimes it's just plain mean. Sometimes that voice in my head says things to me that I would never dream of saying to another person. You know what I'm talking about? What happens is This is what happens for me, is it relives past experiences and conversations and slights, and it's never in a kind way. And what happens is I go habitually over a fight or a conversation that I've had with somebody, and I do a lot of coulda, woulda, shouldas. Yeah? You know what I'm talking about. And then we take it, we worry it like a bone, right? And pretty soon it becomes part of our internal dialogue. It becomes part of our default thinking. And it eventually becomes a habit of a lifetime. Unless we become aware of it and choose something else. So I found this quote today. I've never heard of this guy before. Jonathan Lockwood Hui. I don't know how it's pronounced. Doesn't matter. Life cannot be lived fully or joyfully if our thoughts are focused on regretting the past, preoccupied with anticipating the future, or lost in the mind fog of unconscious habitual behavior. Life cannot be lived fully when we are lost in that unconscious habitual behavior. So one of the reasons that I wanted to talk about this today is because I recently realized that my negative habitual thinking that I kind of thought I was over it's kind of made a resurgence in my life. As many of you know, I've had kind of a difficult couple of months, and as a result what's happened is that my old internal dialogue has crept back into my thinking. And what's concerning me about that is that it's not in alignment with how I feel about life most of the time anymore. I really do see life in a positive, possibility-filled way most of the time. So imagine my dismay when I realized that my default pattern of worry and self-criticism and sadness and all that other stuff was coming back. Ooh. It isn't how I want to live my life. I have strived for years to train myself to look for the good, to find the gratitude, to look on the bright side of life. There was method to my madness, you see. So when I realized this, that what was happening is that those old feelings, that old habitual thinking was bubbling up again. What I realized was that what they are these deeply ingrained habits, thinking habits that are lurking in the subconscious mind. Is this making sense to you? Yeah. The problem is that because thought is creative and we know that thought is creative, those deeply ingrained habits begin to attract similar situations into our lives, which in turn reinforce the habitual thinking. So something happens and we're like, I knew it was true. Here comes that same situation again. Things never change. But the truth is, it isn't the situation that caused the habitual thinking. It's the habitual thinking that attracted the situation. Yes? Okay. So unless we want to keep attracting the same things over and over again, we need to develop new ways of thinking, new habits of thinking. So this is a beautiful quote from Ernest Holmes. I've got a couple of long ones here, which is why I put them on the screen. This is so beautiful. Those of you who are new, Ernest Holmes is the founder of our teaching. He wrote the book, The Science of Mind, that we follow. He wrote this: the practice of right thinking for the purpose of producing definite desired results is of utmost simplicity. It simmers down to the essential fact that we should make a habit of entertaining in mind only those thoughts and ideas which we wish to experience in outward form. I'm going to say that again. We should make a habit of entertaining in mind only those thoughts and ideas which we wish to experience in outward form. If the experience is not right, change the thought or pattern which is the cause of it. We should so change our pattern of thinking that it more nearly expresses and coincides with the perfection which resides in mind God. So it's super simple, right? Except for when it isn't. So part of the reason that our minds slip back into those old habitual patterns so easy is because in some really weird way, our old thinking gives us a certain amount of comfort. It's familiar. It may not be fun, but it's familiar. So when something isn't going the way that we want it to, we can go back and we can find that negative, that habitual thought, and use it to prove or justify the experience that we're having. So say, for instance, you have you keep repeating a pattern, similar pattern about relationships, whether it's personal relationships or work or family relationships, and every time it happens again and the pattern comes up again, you go back to your habitual thought pattern and say, see, I knew it was going to be like that because it's always like that. And so by using the old habitual thinking to justify the experience, we keep perpetuating both the habit and the experience. It's a vicious cycle. So let's take a look. You know, I'm a wordsmith. I like to look at the dictionary definitions of things. Let's take a look at the word habit. An acquired behavior pattern, regularly followed until it has become almost involuntary. A dominant or regular disposition or tendency. And then obviously an addiction. Boy, I could talk a lot about that definition. There's a lot there. But what it tells us is that habits, once they get in there, can be very hard to change. On the light side, I'll give you, for instance, I have been going to the ladies' gym called Curves for many, many years. I've done thousands of workouts, obviously. I may be round, but I'm powerful. So, one day the owner of this particular Curves watched me using a particular machine, and it's this thing where you like have your hands crossed and you're supposed to do like this. It's for the obliques, right? And she says, Pat, you aren't doing it right. You're supposed to do it this way. And at first I was like, what? Do you know how many times I've used this machine? Obviously. What does she mean I'm not doing it right? But then she explained to me why her way was better. It made a whole lot of sense and, you know, give me better results. And okay, yeah. But because it was such an ingrained habit, because I'd done it so many times the other way, I immediately forgot what she told me to do and went back to the old way. But here's the key, and kind of the crux of what I want to talk about today, is that her bringing it to my attention caused me to be aware of what I was doing. And with awareness comes the possibility of change. That's why we do the work that we do. That's why we study. That's why we attend class. That's why we come to the center. So that we can become aware and reminded of a new way of thinking. One time of thinking a positive thought is not going to make a habit. It takes time. It takes discipline. It takes being reminded and aware of it. Because with enough awareness, with enough practice, with enough repetition, it is possible to develop the new habits and the new ways of being. Ernest Holmes said this: this is why everything in your life depends on your belief, why it is done unto you as you believe. Change your belief, comma, or parentheses, habit, and you can change your world. Change your belief and you can change your world. Now I want to share with you that I struggled sharing my struggle about falling back into negative habitual thinking. I mean, I'm the minister, I'm supposed to know that, right? But what I also know is that this life growth stuff is an ongoing process, and it continues to go. So yes, I still deal with things like monkey mind and habitual thinking and melancholy on occasions. I still get pissed off sometimes too. And I preach against it. But what I know, and the reason that I wanted to share it with you, is that I'm far better than I used to be. I really have changed my thinking. I really have healed old patterns and old wounds and fears and insecurities and judgments and doubts. And I still have some things that I'm working on. And that's okay, because it's a lifelong process, lifelong habits. And if you really think about it, wouldn't it be boring if we were like perfect all the time and never had anything to work on? Isn't it kind of cool that we have more to learn and more to become aware of? Please agree with me. So I found this quote by Matthew Donnelly. He wrote, "Your perception is your habitual perspective." How you see the world is your habitual perspective, is what he means. The way you consciously choose to see life on a regular basis. The moment you are aware of your perspective and detach to see things from a different point of view, even slightly, is the moment that your entire complexity from within you changes. So in other words, once you start to become aware of what those habitual patterns are and you decide to change them, something internal starts to shift and change. And the key is awareness. Unless we are aware or mindful of something, we're not likely to change it. So one of the tools that I use for changing habitual patterns is to become aware of what you're aware of. Mary Morrissey puts it in Prosperity Plus, to pay attention to what you're paying attention to. And here's just a really cool little tool that I learned years ago from a student, in fact. And I was talking about being aware of what you're thinking about. What is the tendency of your thoughts? What are your habitual patterns? And this was before cell phones, and this gal would take a timer, and she would set the timer for an hour. And the timer would ding, and she would check in with herself. What am I thinking? What are my habitual patterns? What is my default going on? Now that we have cell phones, it's easy to do. You can set your cell phone for the alarm to go off every hour or a couple hours just to check in. It's about awareness. Because once we become aware of something, we can start to change it. We can develop a new default. In the world of computers, the word default means a selection automatically used by a computer program in the absence of a choice made by the user. Our minds are basically human computers, so unless we make a different choice, we are going to revert back to our default thought patterns. Unless we program it differently. Here's what Ernest Holmes had to say about this. Another long quote, but it's a beauty. It is a known fact that thoughts, often repeated, form patterns in the mind which automatically reproduce themselves. This illustration is often used by psychologists to explain continuously neurotic conditions. Why not use this creative law constructively, dislodging old thought patterns with their morbid reactions to life? These thought patterns have hypnotized humanity into belief that fear, unhappiness, poverty, and sickness must prevail. Why not disrobe this mental darkness with the glorious conception of the new light now known to exist? In other words, as thinking, growing, evolving, choosing individuals. We have the opportunity to consciously and consistently find, replace, and reprogram our default thoughts and put in new information that better reflects who we really are, which is a divine expression of the divine. That is the truth of who we really are. So one tool that I have found to be effective, even as basic as it is saying affirmations. Now, I know people feel differently about affirmations. They say they're elementary, they're basic, they're so 20th century. But you know what? Who cares? They work. Because they work. Because when I am aware that my thoughts are beginning to spiral down, I want to have easy to remember and positive, loving thoughts available to me to quickly and easily stop the spiral from going down. Because when I'm in that place, and I go there sometimes, when I'm in that place of spiraling down, I may not be in a place physically or emotionally to do my deep internal work at the time. I want to be able to quickly and immediately shift the energy. So if repeating positive statements helps me to reprogram my thoughts, to remind myself, to remember, then who cares if they are elementary? So why not make them a habit of a lifetime? So you know what we're going to do now, right? You had no doubt, did you? Let's say these together. I am deserving of love, health, abundance, and joy. Now, if you can't say them and mean it, then just listen. No, say them anyway. Okay, let's say that one again. I am deserving of love, health, abundance, and joy. I am in partnership with the universe. I am open to the fullness of life. Okay, you got to do the hand motions with that one, okay? You ready? Here we go. I am